god. Hi everyone, Scythony Rentano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of this new Parannoul record, After the Magic. This is the third full-length LP from anonymous South Korean singer, songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, and producer Parannoul, following up 2021's To See the Next Part of the Dream, which instantly made this project one of the most buzzed about on the Bandcamp platform, on the shoegaze circuit in general. Most of this record's distorted, hazy, and blissful aesthetics were great and pulled off well, but some of the rough mixing, performances, and one-dimensional vocals were a slight turnoff, even if the music did have kind of this amateurish appeal. At the time this album was being talked about the most, I didn't necessarily see any reason to be overly dismissive toward it, especially since Parannoul seemed to have so much growth potential going forward. The next record was most likely going to have better production on it, as well as more Western distribution, given the fanfare. And yeah, After the Magic is pretty much that album. That maintains the pillowy, noisy, bright, and surreal aesthetics that made this project so compelling to begin with, but also reaches new levels of grandiosity thanks to all of these progressive builds of instrumentation that are more in line with the post-rock leanings the last record showcased. And while in many respects After the Magic is a very dense record that rewards repeated listens, it's also a record whose immense beauty and pop appeal hits instantaneously. Cause this LP is pretty hooky right from the intro track, Polaris, whose beginning guitar chords sound like the initial moments of a big 90s Britpop ballad, or I don't know, Third Eye Blind's Jumper. But then it transitions into this sweet, slow, drum machine-backed jangle guitar jam, topped with gentle lead vocals and strings. Now, it would be easy to cast this off as like some very pretty wallpaper if it just hung here, but it doesn't. There's a gradual build that drives up tension to the point where we get this kaleidoscopic burst of bass and synths and ringing tones that sound absolutely out of this world. It's so thick and it's so layered, but I can also pull apart the various pieces of it in my head. It's really well put together. It's thunderous, it's gorgeous, and there's a strong ending on it too. And from this first track, the record delivers a very gratifying musical journey, like with the glistening and pristine keys on the song Insomnia, whose icy, glacial, and patiently shifting chord progressions are contrasted with these very speedy, tight, and intense breakbeat drum patterns. Now, despite this being such a curious combination, a very difficult one to pull off, the transition into the chorus is still very gratifying, as we're hit with these gracefully building walls of enveloping, shoegazy sound that gets more blissful and heavenly as the track progresses. There are some soaring and high-reaching lead vocals laced into the psychedelic soup too. The synth horns, rock riffs, and glockenspiel on the song Arrival are a nice touch that changes the instrumental palette up a bit. There's a winding, multi-phase song structure to the track too. I can't say the lazily delivered lead vocals in the first leg are doing all that much for me, but the instrumental passages in the second half of the track are some of the most hard-hitting on the entire LP. The following Shine at Night has a very strong sense of place, kicking off with the cinematic sounds of these distant crunchy footsteps, eventually giving way to some tremolo guitar, some meditative rock grooves. The sound of this track is wintry, it's cold, but also otherworldly. Then the chorus melody of the cut seems to come from this very familiar and sweet place. Maybe due in part to the chord progression being so common, but Parannoul definitely turns it into their own. Plus, I love the impassioned, strained lead vocals at the very end of the track, quite explosive moment on the record that really embodies the title of this track. Then the following Parade has one of the strongest chord progression and tune combos in my opinion, really contrasting the frigid vibes of the previous track with something very warm and positive. Lots of peppy violins in the mix, as well as these metallic clanging arpeggios flying in every direction. Another very fitting title on this track as well, as it does present a very grand procession of sound. Then the song Sketchbook further broadens the record's instrumental palette with crickets, ambient tones, and lots of synthetic vocal processing on a couple of harmonies here. It's like the record exists on this plane that bridges dreams and reality, as well as a very natural past with a hyper futuristic present or utopia or just some place far off from here time-wise. And given the sentimental and dreamlike imagery in the lyrics of this track and others on the record as well, that vibe check is not too far off. Plus, multiple impressive phases on this song as well. Like the acoustic guitar chords and the whole passage that the track busts into at the very end could be a song in and of itself, but yet it's just an amazing outro. The song Imagination, oddly enough, is another one that sounds like it has an inconspicuous 90s alt-rock song intro on it. It's one of the more straightforward and rockin' cuts on the LP, I suppose, with a lot of very direct vocal melodies, beats, and downstroked guitars. And while the track does sound as thick as anything else here, the progression is not as gratifying. I found there to be a similar quality about the song Blossom as well, where it kind of hits a decent peak, but then it hangs there. Though, in a way, I do kind of get it. I suppose a record like this should have at least a couple of tracks that are steady in their progressions or maybe cut to the chase. Then the track Sound Inside Me, Waves Inside You. It may not be the longest here, but it does have one of the more incremental and gratifying builds on the entire record, with passages of booming, washed-out rock, ambient tones and noises, eventually reaching this climax of intertwining male and female vocals, thick and again enveloping walls of crashing cymbals and drums, guitars, bass, synths, getting progressively more distorted as it continues on, but also heavenly too. It's really transcendental, and then suddenly at the very end vaporizes under the immensity of its own weight. Then there's the tender closing track, which brings the record to a starry but teary-eyed climax, where the lyrics reflect on the end of some sort of dream. And it essentially recommends you maintain the magic you felt there in your heart, I guess, until you meet that person or that dream state again. It's very fairy tale, but considering the way the music sounds, it's not all that surprising. Also, it's hard not to get totally whipped up into it myself, even though I'm not necessarily one to be easily impressed by fantastical instrumentation and musings. You shut up. I'm feeling a decent 8 on this record. Transition, have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video that you could check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Parannoul, forever.